The whisper started in Florence, a city of dazzling art and cutthroat power. Everyone knew the Medici family ruled everything, from the banks to the streets. They were rich beyond belief, powerful beyond measure. But, for all their glory, there was one chilling truth. The higher you built your empire, the more targets you put on your back. Beneath the glittering surface, schemes brewed, daggers sharpened, and betrayals were plotted. These are the shocking stories of 5 times the Medici almost lost it all to a deadly plan. Number 5. The Albizzi-Strozzi plot against Cosimo de Medici the Elder. Florence in the early 1400s was a bustling republic, a city of merchants and bankers, but beneath the surface, old powerful families constantly jockeyed for control. The Albizzi family, particularly Rinaldo degli Albizzi, saw themselves as the true leaders, holding the reins of power through tradition and influence. Then came the Medici, a newer, incredibly wealthy banking family who were rapidly gaining popularity with the common people. Cosimo de Medici, head of the family, was a shrewd businessman and a quiet but formidable political operator. He wasn't loud like Rinaldo, but his influence spread like wildfire through his vast network of debtors and allies. Cosimo lent money to everyone, from poor artisans to powerful princes, and in return he gained loyalty and leverage. This quiet rise infuriated Rinaldo degli Albizzi, who saw Cosimo as a threat to his family's long-held dominance. Rinaldo believed Cosimo's popularity was dangerous, a step towards tyranny, and he decided something had to be done to stop it. The rivalry between the Albizzi and the Medici grew hotter than a Tuscan summer. Rinaldo, unable to stomach Cosimo's growing power, sought an opportunity to remove him from the scene for good. In 1433, a political crisis arose over a military defeat suffered by Florence. The city's forces had been badly beaten by Lucca, a rival city, and the Florentines were looking for someone to blame. Rinaldo seized this chance. He gathered his allies, including the powerful family of the Strozzi, and accused Cosimo of mismanagement and betrayal. The argument was simple. Cosimo's policies, particularly his influence over the city's finances, had led to the military disaster. This was a thinly veiled excuse, but it gained traction in the tense atmosphere of Florence. Rinaldo moved fast. He convened the Signoria, the city's governing council, packing it with his supporters. They voted to arrest Cosimo de Medici. On September 7, 1433, Cosimo was summoned to the Palazzo della Signoria, the seat of Florentine government. He walked into the palace knowing full well the danger he faced. Once inside, he was immediately seized and imprisoned in a small cell in the tower of the palazzo. The cell was so cramped it was known as the Alberhatino, the little hotel. Cosimo was held there, surrounded by his enemies, awaiting judgment. Rinaldo's plan was to condemn Cosimo to death for treason. He wanted to execute him publicly, an act that would shatter the Medici's power and send a clear message to anyone who dared challenge the old guard. Cosimo, despite his confinement, remained remarkably calm. He understood the precariousness of his situation. He was locked in a cell high above the city, with a bowl of soup and a few pieces of bread each day, fearing poison with every bite. To avoid a slow, painful death, he barely ate. His guard, a man named Federigo Malavolti, took pity on him. Cosimo cleverly bribed Malavolti with a large sum of money, 1,000 ducats, asking only for a little bread and wine to survive, and more importantly, a way to communicate with the outside world. Through Malavolti, Cosimo managed to send messages to his allies and friends, particularly to Niccolo Valori, a trusted confidante. Meanwhile, Rinaldo degli Albizzi and his allies pressed hard for Cosimo's execution. The debate raged within the Signoria. Some members, fearing the backlash from Cosimo's many supporters among the common people and fellow bankers, hesitated to condemn him to death. They worried about civil unrest. Others, fearing the Medici's wealth and influence even after Cosimo's death, believed that a simple execution would not be enough to eradicate the family's power. They argued that killing Cosimo would only make him a martyr and unite his followers against them. Instead, they proposed exile. This was a compromise, a less extreme measure that would still remove Cosimo from Florence and strip him of his immediate power. The discussion went back and forth, arguments turning into heated shouting matches. Eventually, a vote was taken. The decision was not death, but exile. Cosimo de Medici was to be banished from Florence for 10 years. His enemies believed this would be enough to break the Medici's hold on the city. They thought that without their patriarch, the family's vast banking empire would crumble and their political network would unravel. The sentence also included the exile of other prominent Medici supporters, further weakening the family's position. Upon hearing the verdict, Cosimo felt a wave of relief mixed with a touch of grim satisfaction. He had survived. His enemies had failed to land the killing blow. On October 3rd, 1433, a month after his arrest, Cosimo was released from his cell. He was escorted out of Florence, not as a condemned man, but as an exile. He went first to Padua, then to Venice, where he was received with great honor. Many Florentine families who supported the Medici and owed them money followed him, relocating their businesses and their loyalty to Venice. Cosimo used his exile not as a period of defeat, but as an opportunity. He continued to manage his vast banking empire from afar, ensuring that his financial network remained intact and even grew. He continued to lend money and influence affairs, making Venice a second Florentine power center. Back in Florence, Rinaldo degli Albizzi's victory was short-lived. The city, stripped of Cosimo's economic dynamism and riddled with political infighting, soon began to suffer. Businesses faltered, and the common people grumbled. The exile of Cosimo and his allies created a vacuum that Rinaldo couldn't fill effectively. His rule was seen as heavy-handed and unpopular. Within a year, the political tide turned. Cosimo's supporters, patiently working behind the scenes, managed to gain control of the Signoria. In September 1434, exactly 1 year after Cosimo's arrest, a new government was formed. Its first act was to revoke Cosimo's exile and order Rinaldo degli Albizzi and his principal allies to be banished instead. Cosimo de Medici returned to Florence in triumph. The city welcomed him back as a liberator. The very people who had tried to destroy him were now sent into exile, never to return, as Rinaldo spent the rest of his life fruitlessly trying to raise armies to retake Florence, dying in exile. Cosimo, now firmly established as the undisputed leader, ruled Florence for the next 30 years, not as a tyrant, but as a subtle master of political maneuvering. He laid the foundation for the Medici dynasty, a powerful and lasting legacy that defined Florence for centuries. The Albizzi-Strozzi plot, meant to end the Medici, instead propelled them to even greater heights. Number 4. The Pitti and Neroni plot against Piero de Medici. Piero de Medici, son of the illustrious Cosimo the Elder, found himself in a delicate position. When Cosimo passed away in 1464, the Florentine Republic held its breath, wondering if the Medici's incredible hold on power would survive. Piero, known as Piero the Goody due to his debilitating illness, was not his father's equal in political skill or physical vigor. While many in Florence, especially those who resented the Medici's quiet but absolute control, saw this as an opportunity. They believed that with Cosimo gone, the time was ripe to break the Medici's influence and restore what they considered to be a true republic, free from the sway of one family. Among those who harbored deep resentment were several powerful Florentine families, chief among them the Pitti and the Neroni. Luca Pitti, an incredibly wealthy and ambitious banker, had been a strong supporter of Cosimo de Medici. However, after Cosimo's death, Luca's ambition knew no bounds. He felt he deserved a greater share of power and saw Piero's illness as a weakness to exploit. He built a magnificent palace, larger and grander than any Medici residence, and sought to establish himself as the new dominant force in Florence. Diotalvi Neroni, another influential figure, along with his brothers Giovanni and Francesco, also harbored personal grievances and political ambitions. They believed the Medici had grown too arrogant and that Florence was suffering under their dominance. The conspirators, including Luca Pitti, Diotalvi Neroni, Agnolo Accioli, and Niccolo Soderini, began to meet in secret, whispering about how to remove Piero from power. They planned to take advantage of Piero's poor health and his perceived lack of political acumen. Their plan was audacious. They would ambush Piero as he traveled, either capturing him or, if necessary, killing him. The intention was to spark a revolt in the city, rallying the people to their cause, claiming they were restoring liberty to Florence. They felt that eliminating Piero would create a power vacuum they could fill, thereby dismantling the Medici's extensive network of alliances and financial control. The opportunity arose in the summer of 1466. Piero de Medici, suffering from a severe attack of gout, needed to travel from his country villa at Careggi to his palace in Florence. The conspirators learned of this journey and planned their ambush. They positioned a group of armed men along the narrow road near the village of Percasina, a route Piero would undoubtedly take. Their intention was to block the road, stop Piero's litter or carriage, and then seize him. The timing was critical, as a successful ambush would allow them to act before news could spread, and Medici loyalists could react. Piero, despite his illness, was not entirely oblivious to the growing tensions. His son, the young Lorenzo, later known as the Magnificent, possessed a sharp mind and an uncanny ability to sense danger. Lorenzo, who was traveling with his father, had received a warning, possibly from a spy or a loyal informant, within the conspirators' circle. The exact source of the tip remains a matter of historical debate, but the warning was clear danger lay ahead on the road to Florence. Acting on this intelligence, Lorenzo made a quick and decisive move. He changed his route. Instead of taking the direct and expected path, he guided his father's party along an alternate road, a less traveled route that bypassed the planned ambush site. When the conspirators' armed men sprung their trap at Percasina, they found nothing but an empty road. Their carefully laid plan had been foiled by a last-minute change. Of course, a testament to Lorenzo's quick thinking and the subtle network of intelligence the Medici still possessed. Though the ambush failed, the conspirators knew their intentions had been exposed. The plotters, now in the open, decided to press their advantage in Florence. They hoped that the general unrest and their considerable influence would allow them to overthrow the Medici through political means, even without the assassination. The Luca Pitti rallied his supporters, and the city became a tense standoff. Armed men appeared on the streets, loyal to different factions. Piero de Medici, despite his ill health, acted swiftly and firmly. He called upon his allies, particularly those loyal to the Medici family and those who feared civil war more than Medici rule. He also leveraged the Medici's vast financial resources, calling in debts and mobilizing support from their numerous clients and dependents. The immediate aftermath was a period of intense negotiation and brinkmanship. Both sides paraded their armed supporters, but neither wished for full-scale civil war. Piero, demonstrating a surprising strength, moved decisively to isolate the conspirators. He secured the support of the Florentine guilds and the common people, reminding them of the stability and prosperity the Medici had brought. He also shrewdly divided the conspirators. Luca Pitti, ambitious but ultimately timid, was offered a pardon in exchange for abandoning his co-conspirators. Pitti, swayed by the promise of safety and the chance to retain his wealth, accepted the deal and abandoned his allies. This betrayal crippled the conspiracy. Without Pitti's formidable support, the remaining plotters were exposed and vulnerable. Neroni and his brothers, along with Niccolo Soderini and Agnolo Acciaioli, were arrested or fled the city. Piero, though merciful by the standards of the time, was firm in his justice. The principal conspirators were exiled from Florence, their properties confiscated. Luca Pitti, despite his pardon, suffered a loss of prestige and influence, fading from the political scene. The failed plot, far from weakening the Medici, actually solidified their power. It showed that even with Piero's illness, the family was still capable of defending itself and striking back. It also cemented the reputation of the young Lorenzo, who had demonstrated remarkable foresight and courage. The Pitti and Neroni plot, a desperate gamble by old rivals, failed to kill the head of the Medici and instead strengthened the roots of their dynasty, ensuring their continued dominance for generations. Number 3, the Fuoriusciti plot against Cosimo, the First de Medici Battle of Montemerlo. The year 1537 in Florence was a powder keg. Alessandro de Medici, the first Duke of Florence, had been brutally assassinated by his cousin Lorenzino just months earlier. This shocking event threw the city into chaos and created a massive power vacuum. Alessandro had been imposed on Florence by the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, and many Florentines, especially the Fuoriusciti, or exiles, deeply resented this foreign-backed rule and yearned for the return of the Republic. They saw Alessandro's death as their golden opportunity. Amidst the confusion, a young, unexpected Medici stepped forward, Cosimo de Medici, a 17-year-old distant cousin who had been living quietly in the Mugello countryside. The Florentine Senate, desperate for stability and eager to maintain some form of Medici rule, but hoping to control a young and inexperienced duke, chose Cosimo as Alessandro's successor. They assumed he would be a puppet they could easily manipulate, but Cosimo had other ideas. He was shrewd, ambitious, and utterly ruthless, quickly demonstrating a cunning far beyond his years. He seized power with an iron grip, showing no intention of being anyone's puppet. The Fuoriusciti, led by prominent figures like Filippo Strozzi the Younger and Piero Strozzi, were furious. They were prominent Florentine exiles who had always championed the Republic and fiercely opposed the Medici. They saw Cosimo's ascension as a continuation of tyranny, and his decisive actions proved their fears correct. They had been waiting for a chance to strike, and Alessandro's assassination, followed by Cosimo's unexpected rise, fueled their determination. They believed that Cosimo, being young and new to power, would be easy to dislodge. Their goal was clear: overthrow Cosimo, kill him if necessary, and restore the Florentine Republic. They were convinced that many citizens within Florence would rise up to support them once they launched their attack. Filippo Strozzi, a wealthy banker and a lifelong opponent of the Medici, poured his vast fortune into raising an army. He gathered a motley force of mercenaries and fellow exiles, numbering around 4,000 men. Their plan was to march on Florence, enter the city, and incite a general uprising. They believed that once the Florentines saw their Republican liberators, they would throw off Cosimo's yoke. They established their base at Montemerlo, a strategic fortress located just a few miles from Florence, planning their final assault on the city. The entire operation was a bold attempt at a military coup with the ultimate goal of eliminating Cosimo and his ducal government. Cosimo, despite his youth, was a master of intelligence and military strategy. He knew about the Fuoriusciti's preparations. He had his spies everywhere, infiltrating their ranks and monitoring their movements. He also secured the crucial backing of Emperor Charles V, who had no desire to see the Florentine Republic restored, as it would weaken his influence in Italy. Charles V dispatched Spanish and German imperial troops to support Cosimo. Cosimo also began to raise his own forces, hiring experienced mercenary captains like Alessandro Vitelli. The stage was set for a confrontation. On August 1st, 1537, the two forces met at Montemerlo. The battle was swift and decisive. Cosimo's forces, bolstered by the disciplined imperial troops, were better organized and led than the Fuoriusciti's ragtag army. Alessandro Vitelli, Cosimo's general, launched a surprise attack, catching the exiles off guard. The battle turned into a rout. The Fuoriusciti forces were quickly overwhelmed, suffering heavy casualties. Many were killed, and hundreds were captured. The immediate aftermath was devastating for the exiles. Filippo Strozzi and his sons, along with other prominent Republican leaders, were among those captured. Cosimo wasted no time in consolidating his victory. He ordered the execution of many of the captured Republican leaders. Filippo Strozzi, a major prize, was imprisoned in the Fortezza de Basso, the formidable fortress in Florence. Cosimo was determined to make an example of him. Strozzi endured torture and interrogation. Official reports claimed he committed suicide in his cell, but many believed he was either tortured to death or murdered on Cosimo's orders. His death effectively ended the Strozzi family's long-standing opposition to the Medici. The Battle of Montemurlo was a pivotal moment in Florentine history. It was a crushing defeat for the Republican cause and a resounding victory for Cosimo I. It eliminated the most dangerous threat to his rule and solidified his position as the absolute Duke of Florence. The failed plot intended to assassinate Cosimo and restore the Republic instead cemented the Medici dynasty's hold on the city for the next 2 centuries. Cosimo I went on to rule for over 30 years, transforming Florence into the Grand Duchy of Tuscany and becoming one of the most powerful and feared rulers in Italy, a direct consequence of his ruthless victory at Montemurlo. The dream of a Florentine Republic was effectively extinguished, buried beneath the bodies of its most ardent champions. Number 2. Lorenzino de Medici's assassination of Alessandro de Medici. The air in Florence in the 1530s was thick with intrigue. The Medici family, once merely the city's leading citizens, had been elevated to the status of dukes. Alessandro de Medici, a controversial and often tyrannical ruler, was the first Duke of Florence. He was an illegitimate son, possibly of Lorenzo de Medici, Duke of Urbino, or perhaps even of Pope Clement VII. His rule was brutal and absolute, enforced by imperial troops supplied by his father-in-law, Emperor Charles V. Alessandro's excesses, his cruel behavior, and his disregard for Florentine traditions made him deeply unpopular, even among many who had once supported the Medici. His presence was a constant reminder that Florence was no longer a free republic, but a duchy under foreign influence. Among those who resented Alessandro's rule was his own cousin, Lorenzino de Medici. Lorenzino was a member of a junior branch of the Medici family, a cultured and intelligent young man with a passion for classical literature and a flair for theatricality. He was nicknamed Lorenzacchio, or Bad Lorenzo, for his wild behavior, including once decapitating ancient statues in Rome. Lorenzino was also a close companion and confidant of Duke Alessandro. They often caroused together, sharing secrets and indulging in illicit pleasures. This closeness gave Lorenzino unparalleled access to the Duke, a dangerous intimacy that would ultimately be exploited for a deadly purpose. Lorenzino outwardly appeared loyal to Alessandro, participating in his revelries and acting as his trusted friend. But beneath the surface, a dark plot was brewing. Lorenzino claimed to be deeply troubled by Alessandro's tyranny and his destructive impact on Florence. He saw himself as a modern-day Brutus, a Republican hero destined to free his city from a tyrant, just as Brutus had supposedly freed Rome from Caesar. Whether his motivations were purely patriotic or mixed with personal resentment, ambition, or even a twisted sense of poetic justice, remains a subject of historical debate. Regardless, Lorenzino resolved to kill his cousin. The plan Lorenzino concocted was insidious in its simplicity and chilling in its betrayal. He lured Alessandro into a trap using a bait. The Duke could not resist a woman. On the night of January 5th, 1537, Lorenzino told Alessandro that he had arranged a secret rendezvous for him with a beautiful married woman, supposedly Lorenzino's own sister, Luisa-Strozzi, a woman Alessandro had long desired. Lorenzino insisted that Alessandro come alone to a private chamber in Lorenzino's own house, just across from the Medici palace, to ensure the utmost secrecy and discretion. Alessandro, trusting his cousin completely and eager for the illicit encounter, walked willingly into the trap. Alessandro arrived at Lorenzino's house that cold January night, leaving his guards outside. He entered the chamber where he expected to find the woman, but instead he found only darkness and silence. As he sat down, perhaps growing impatient, Lorenzino suddenly emerged from the shadows. With Lorenzino was a hired assassin, a brutish man named Michele del Tavolicino, also known as Scoronconcolo. Lorenzino himself plunged a dagger into Alessandro's body. The Duke, a strong man, fought back fiercely, struggling against his attackers. A violent struggle ensued in the dimly lit room. Alessandro managed to injure Lorenzino's hand, but he was overwhelmed by the two assailants. Scoronconcolo finished the job, brutally stabbing the Duke multiple times until he lay dead on the floor. The immediate aftermath of the assassination was a mixture of chaos and confusion. Lorenzino, with his bloodied hand, fled the scene with Scoronconcolo. They locked the door to the room, hoping to delay the discovery of the body. But Lorenzino had expected the assassination to spark a Republican uprising in Florence. He had even prepared a speech to deliver to the Florentine citizens, proclaiming their freedom, but his grand plan failed spectacularly. The Florentines, weary of constant political upheaval and fearing the wrath of the emperor, did not rise up. Instead, there was fear and uncertainty. The Medici family, though shocked by Alessandro's death, quickly moved to secure their power. Lorenzino, realizing his hoped-for revolution was not materializing, had to flee Florence for his life. He roamed Europe as an exile for years, often hunted by agents of the emperor and Cosimo de Medici, who became the new Duke of Florence and sought revenge for Alessandro's murder. Lorenzino wrote his famous Apologia, a defense of his actions, arguing that he was a liberator. But few believed him, and he was never able to find a safe haven. He was eventually hunted down and assassinated in Venice in 1548, 11 years after Alessandro's murder, likely by agents of Cosimo I or the emperor. The assassination of Alessandro de Medici was a dramatic and bloody affair that exposed the dark underbelly of Medici power. It was a deeply personal betrayal, a kinsman murdering his own kin. While it did not immediately restore the Republic, as Lorenzino had hoped, it profoundly impacted the trajectory of the Medici dynasty. It paved the way for the ascension of Cosimo I, a far more effective and ruthless ruler who would transform Florence into the Grand Duchy of Tuscany. Lorenzino's desperate act, intended to free Florence from tyranny, instead led to a stronger and more centralized Medici rule, cementing their position for centuries to come. The assassination became a cautionary tale of ambition, betrayal, and the often unpredictable consequences of violence in the pursuit of political ideals. Number 1. The Pazzi Conspiracy. Florence, 1478. The city was a dazzling jewel of the Renaissance, brimming with art, poetry, and philosophy. At its heart were the Medici brothers Lorenzo, known as the Magnificent, a brilliant statesman, poet, and patron of the arts, and his younger brother, Giuliano, handsome and charismatic. They held Florence in their grasp, not through titles, but through immense wealth, political cunning, and immense popular support. Their banking empire spanned Europe. Their influence touched popes and kings. But even the brightest light casts the longest shadow, and their power generated fierce resentment among old noble families who longed for the days of the Republic, when no single family held such sway. Chief among the resentful were the Pazzi family, another immensely wealthy Florentine banking family. They were old money, proud and influential, but increasingly overshadowed by the Medici. They bristled under Lorenzo's dominance, feeling their own power and prestige diminishing. At the head of this family was Jacopo de Pazzi, a shrewd but aging patriarch, and his nephew, Francesco de Pazzi, a volatile and ambitious man driven by intense hatred for Lorenzo. They felt the Medici were stifling Florence, denying true liberty, and hoarding all the glory for themselves. But it wasn't just Florentine rivals who wanted the Medici gone. Pope Sixtus IV harbored a deep animosity towards Lorenzo de Medici. Lorenzo had opposed the Pope's ambitions to acquire territory in Romagna and had denied the Pope a loan to buy the town of Imola, a crucial strategic point. Instead, Lorenzo had helped Francesco Salviati, the Pope's preferred candidate for Archbishop of Pisa, secure the position. This infuriated the Pope. He saw Lorenzo as a formidable obstacle to his temporal power in Italy. The Pope and his nephew Girolamo Riario, a ruthless and ambitious cardinal, soon found common ground with the Pazzi. The Pope saw a way to break the Medici's power in Florence and secure his own interests. The Pazzi saw a way to restore their family's prominence and perhaps take over Florence. The conspirators grew to include a motley crew: Archbishop Salviati, eager for revenge for his perceived humiliation, Bernardo Bandini Baroncelli, a Pazzi loyalist, and even a priest named Antonio Maffei de Volterra, and a former condottiero, or mercenary captain, named Stefano de Bagnoni. Their plan was audacious and deadly: assassinate both Lorenzo and Giuliano de Medici simultaneously. They believed that without their leaders, the Medici family would fall apart, and Florence would be ripe for a takeover. The original plan involved poisoning the brothers at a banquet, but Giuliano fell ill, making that difficult. So they chose a more public, more shocking location, Florence Cathedral, during High Mass on Easter Sunday, April 26, 1478. The choice of location was deliberate. During the Mass, the brothers would be unarmed and surrounded by worshippers, seemingly safe but completely exposed. The conspirators knew the exact moment of the elevation of the host, when all eyes would be fixed on the altar and the Medici brothers would bow their heads. This was to be the signal for the attack. Francesco de Pazzi and Bernardo Bandini Baroncelli were assigned to kill Giuliano. Antonio Maffei and Stefano da Bagnoni, both priests, were tasked with killing Lorenzo. The plan was meticulously rehearsed, with other conspirators ready to seize the Palazzo della Signoria and rally the Florentine people to their cause once the deeds were done. On that fateful Easter Sunday, the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore was packed. The air thrummed with devotion and the scent of incense. Lorenzo and Giuliano de Medici stood near the altar, surrounded by dignitaries. As the bells tolled and the host was elevated, the assassins struck. Francesco de Pazzi and Bernardo Bandini Baroncelli lunged at Giuliano. Giuliano, caught completely off guard, was stabbed repeatedly. He fell to the marble floor, bleeding profusely, dying quickly from his wounds. Bandini, having dispatched Giuliano, then rushed towards Lorenzo, but Lorenzo was alert. He was attacked by Maffei and Stefano, but they were clumsy, perhaps hesitant to strike a killing blow in such a sacred place. Maffei merely wounded Lorenzo in the neck. Lorenzo, though, surprised, instinctively drew his sword and fought back. His friends, including the poet Poliziano, quickly formed a protective circle around him. They managed to drag Lorenzo away from the altar and into the sacristy, locking the heavy bronze doors behind them. Bernardo Bandini, failing to get to Lorenzo in the crowded church, fled the cathedral. The immediate aftermath was pure chaos. The assassination of Giuliano, carried out in plain sight, horrified the worshippers. News of the attack spread like wildfire through the city. Archbishop Salviati and his men had simultaneously attempted to seize the Palazzo della Signoria, the seat of Florentine government. They burst into the palace, but the alert Signoria members and their guards quickly barricaded themselves and fought back. The attempt to capture the government failed, and many of Salviati's men were captured or killed. Lorenzo, having survived the attack, emerged from the sacristy. He found the city in uproar, but not the uprising the Pazzi had expected. The Florentine people, far from rallying to the conspirators, passionately sided with the Medici. They loved Lorenzo. They poured into the streets, shouting, "Pal! Pal!" a rallying cry for the Medici, referring to the balls on their coat of arms. The Pazzi and their allies were hunted down with furious vengeance. Francesco de Pazzi, still covered in Giuliano's blood, was dragged from his bed and hanged from a window of the Palazzo della Signoria. And Archbishop Salviati, in his clerical robes, suffered the same fate, hanged alongside his fellow conspirators. Jacopo de Pazzi, who had fled the city, was later captured, brought back, tortured, and also hanged. His body was then dragged through the streets and thrown into the Arno River, a final act of desecration. Bernardo Bandini Baroncelli, who had escaped Florence, was eventually hunted down in Constantinople and sent back to Florence for execution. The Pazzi conspiracy, a desperate attempt to assassinate the Medici and overthrow their rule, backfired spectacularly. It failed to kill Lorenzo and instead solidified his power. The brutal response against the conspirators sent a clear message: the Medici were not to be trifled with. Lorenzo the Magnificent, having survived the assassination attempt, became even more popular and powerful. He mourned his brother Giuliano deeply, but his survival and the public's fierce loyalty ensured the Medici dynasty's continued dominance in Florence for generations. The conspiracy, meant to end the Medici, instead made them unassailable, transforming Lorenzo from a powerful citizen into a near absolute ruler, cementing his legendary status in Florentine history.